Hey, Veeru.
Hello.
I'm just getting things set up. That's why you don't see my face. I also look a mess, but that's why also you don't see my face.
Do I sound okay?
Hey, Veeru.
Hello.
Sorry. I'm just
No,
getting
sorry.
things set
Ignore.
up. That's why you don't
Okay.
see my
Wait
face. I
one
also look a
second.
mess. That's why.
Sorry, because the live stream is streaming, so that's why you heard my voice twice. Yes, you sound good.
Okay, great.
Just getting ready to share this on the LD Facebook page. If there are any family or friends who you would like to see you throw down, now is the time to share that link.
Okay. Are we gonna be starting a new email chain or just sending it from the disclosure chain earlier?
Let's do an email chain. Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it through the email chain that you all currently have.
Okay.
But well, yeah, let's just do it that way. It makes it simple. Share to a group. There's Raunak. Hey, Raunak. Can you hear me? Hopefully you can hear me, but hello. Can you hear me, Ronick? Just
Yeah, I'm just setting up my mic and everything.
got it. So to make sure.
Jasmine, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I just had an external mic, so I just want to double check.
Yep. You sound good. Oh, y'all saw Rita's. Can you add Rita to the email chain, please?
Yeah, are you making the email chain?
Yeah, should I just make a new one? Because if I forward this chain, will she be able to see all the documents?
Yeah, I can.
Yes, but if you wanted to, you can create a new one as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you create a new one? Because otherwise we'd have to forward every email after we send it.
Yeah. Okay.
And instead of the Raunak Dua 2025 one, can you just put this one on the chain?
Okay. Are there any other emails I need to get on here, or should I just send it?
That should be good.
Okay.
That should be good. I'm gonna start talking very, very soon. I'm just gonna do a few more sharing things. Can you all turn your videos on so I can pin? Pin. 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 Gallery. Excellent. All right, I'm gonna start talking. Excellent, excellent. All right, y'all. Welcome to another Debate Boutique live stream. Wow, we are back and better with those from the summer. I'm always so excited to be putting not only my face, but the face of very hardworking students, alums, coaches, consultants, all of these folks showcasing not only their talent, but also being a resource and aid for students of the community to get excited about debate, to learn something, to be a part of something. It truly is a fun and honor to do. So in this live stream debate, we will be having one of our collective coaching students, Veeru, on the affirmative, debating on the negative. One of our Debate Boutique alums, truly an OG, Raunak, truly an OG, who now is a freshman at Wake Forest DL. If you know, you know, already doing some really impressive things as a freshman in college debate. So like, you know, hats off on the negative. So this is a special debate for many reasons, because it means for me, it's like a full circle community engagement, an alum of Debate Boutique, debating someone who is pretty brand new to Debate Boutique now, really engaging and collaborating over making each other better, but also community. Real big part of that. Could talk a lot about the collective coaching program, but all of that information is in the link or in the description box, so you can read that at your own leisure. We're just going to jump straight into this debate. Veeru, before you actually do the affirmative, can you state the resolution just so that folks can have that mapped for what is the resolution that this debate or the statement that this debate is centered around? Because I know that LD topics change every like 2 months, 3 months. So when folks watch this a month later from now, they have a bit of a reference point. So, all right, I'm done talking. I'm going to let this debate go down. Super excited for this. Raunak, if you can please have some constructive criticism at the end of this, that would be amazing. Great. I am done talking. A record for me.
Okay, so the resolution is resolved the member nations of the World Trade Organization ought to reduce intellectual property protections for medicines. Okay, is everyone good for me to start? All right, starting now. The value is justice, defined by Aristotle as giving each his due. Thus, the standard and role of the ballot is to promote social inclusion. Social inclusion undoes social exclusion, the method by which power structures disadvantage people today, UN 16. Social exclusion is a multidimensional phenomenon not limited to material deprivation. Social inclusion is defined as a process of improving the terms of participation in society, particularly for people who are disadvantaged, through enhancing opportunities, access to resources, voice, and respect for rights. Despite limitations, data allow for meaningful analysis for exclusion. Social inclusion is necessary for justice, Collins 01. Social inclusion is a principle of justice. Social inclusion does not seek broadly equivalent outcomes. It concentrates attentions not on relative disadvantage between groups, but rather on the absolute disadvantage of particular groups in society. Thus, social groups are distinguished from the individuals that form the groups, but they are defined by the combination of separate identities. That means I preclude other moral theories because social groups are constitutive of the fundamental identity of humans, and the understanding of social groups as distinctly relational concepts is a necessary justification for any framework. Social inclusion is key to address real-world policymaking, Labonte 02. Our concern should be not with groups or conditions that are excluded, but with the political powers that create excluded groups and conditions. Social inclusion may be a useful idea and struggles to keep the organized, disorganized, more organized, the less capable, more resourced and confident in their capacities. Social inclusion should give practitioners pause to question, how has their work improved the situation for the least well off within the ambit of their communities, and policymakers in redirecting public governance toward a good life for all? Politics devoid of moral obligations collapses into wide-scale atrocity, Parsons 09. Utilitarian reasoning will attempt to solve the problem by determining the relative worth of the persons involved. Throwing the least desirable person overboard becomes an actual moral imperative. An advocate of the utilitarian ethic claims that an act is right if it is useful, but useful for what? The Nazis had one view of a good end. In practice, utilitarianism becomes a consensus-based bully ethic. Without the admission of moral absolutes such as do not torture others, do not rape women, do not commit genocide, etc., etc., we do not have an overarching framework for intelligible discussion about the sanctity and and worth of individual human life. And we are therefore confronted with raw appeals to force and to dishonest appeal to promote the greater good to the expense of the sanctity of the individual. The affirmative defines reduce as to diminish in size, amount, extent, or number. This means that intellectual property protections will be substantially diminished in their extent of protections on corporations and in the number of protections that there are. Advantage one is access. TRIPS are the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights substantially limit access to medications, proved in a thorough first-of-its-kind empirical study, Zhang and Quan 15. Since the introduction of TRIPS, there has been concern that poor access to essential medicines in developing countries would be exacerbated. Despite extensive research, there are few empiricals in the study investigated the effects of IPR on access to medicine. In the results of analyses, higher levels of IPR significantly increase the likelihood of non-access to prescribed medicines, even after controlling for individual and national characteristics. We cannot deny that medicines are associated with the commodities, which is traded through the capitalist system. Medicines as commodities have been monopolized through the patent system. In pressures derived from membership in the World Trade Organization, developing countries face pressures to impose higher levels of IPR. Intellectual property protections amplify the effects of the racialized capitalist system. While reducing intellectual property protections will not solve everything, it can reduce the instances of medical imperialism which hurt the most vulnerable globally. Vani 21. A pharmaceutical is protected by patents due to its legally mandated exclusivity. Patent owners, multinational corporations have the right to prevent others from making, using, or selling a patented invention. From the onset, this TRIPS IP regime created an imbalance between innovation, market monopoly, and medicine access. This has led to several issues. The market monopoly of IP rights has created a privileged societal class with access to life-saving medicine. It highlights the measures corporations backed by governments are willing to protect their profits at the cost of human lives. We reveal IP laws, racial investments, and whiteness and its continuing implications for racial inequality, particularly in the way it informs systems of ownership, circulation, and distribution of knowledge. The issue is excessive pricing for medicines is a growing problem in developed countries, as well as now become the single biggest category of healthcare spending in the U.S. Unmitigated, the impacts of IPR and capitalism devastate. Bonnie 21. The neoliberal framework, including the critical role IP law plays in this form of civilization, is unsuitable model for delivering the goods that respond to health emergencies. This inequity was obvious in the early days of the pandemic, when test kits, PPEs, and ventilation machines were being distributed on the basis of who could pay the most rather than who needed them the most. The bigger that neighbor response currently adopted by developed countries hurts everyone, because failing to stop the spread of the virus globally allows more mutations. The hoarding of vaccines by developed countries continues unabated. While COVID-19 may endanger all of us, it is far more costly to some than others. Numerous reports have shown how Black and brown people are impacted most by the pandemic. In India, the pandemic has hit along caste lines. Thus, while recognizing a broken global IP regime that triggered the scramble for vaccines, the racialized impact of the pandemic cannot be ignored, and it points to the entangled roots of race and capitalism. Advantage 2 is biopiracy. Biopiracy is a costly and impactful ongoing issue, the theft of traditional indigenous medicine. Imran et al. 21. The corporate hijacking is the most important health hazard in this era. Commercial enterprises are using intellectual property rights to patent indigenous plants, seeds, and medicines. The new era of biotechnology relies on the genes of living organisms as raw materials. Sri Lanka, after its 30-year civil war, is moving towards solid growth and conservation of the environment, which is a major component in sustainable development, where the conservation of biodiversity plays a significant role. We propose as scientists abolishing biopiracy and also to foster the fair utilization of natural resources, since the economy in the most developing countries is agriculture. Biopiracy is biological theft, illegal collection of indigenous plants by corporations who patent them for their own use. It is aided by intellectual property protections. Timmermans 03. In many developing countries, a large part of the population depends mainly on the traditional medicine for the primary health care. The exploitation and appropriation under Western IPR by unauthorized parties of biological and genetic resources and or associated traditional medicinal knowledge without the approval or consent of the holders and without adequate compensation has raised significant concerns. The potential to patent-derived products provides an important incentive for pharmaceutical companies interested in traditional medicine, since it creates the benefits for the possibility to accrue and thus ultimately for sharing benefits. Without reducing intellectual property protections to curb biopiracy, indigenous heritage and economic sovereignty will be lost. Shiva 07. The epidemic of biopiracy is an assault on the living heritage of biodiversity and cumulative innovation embodied in the traditional knowledge of agriculture and medicine. In the long run, it determines livelihoods and economic sovereignty. The moment a patent is on plants and seeds derived from Indian biological resources, biopiracy has occurred. Challenging and stopping such biopiracy is duty of the government. Patent claims over biodiversity and indigenous knowledge that are based on the innovation, creativity, and genius of the people of the third world are acts of biopiracy. Patents on biodiversity imply that corporations who own patents get exclusive rights to the production and distribution of seeds, livestock, and material. This established monopolies on food and health makes it illegal for farmers to exchange seed and prevents economy laws in the TRIPS agreement have unleashed an epidemic of the piracy of nature's creativity and millennia of indigenous innovation. Good for cross.
Okay. Wait, what about the timer? All right. My first question is, what is justice?
Okay, so the general definition from Aristotle is giving each their due, but the method by which we measure, like, giving each individual their due is social inclusion, which just means that we're worrying about undoing certain power structures and ensuring that the absolute differences and differences between the advantaged and disadvantaged is removed.
Well, why is social inclusion good?
Okay, social inclusion is good.
Sorry, let me rephrase that. What
Yeah.
constitutes social inclusion?
Okay, so social inclusion is defined more by what it undoes, which is social exclusion, right? So social exclusion is defined in the UN card as just removing the ability for individuals to participate in society on an equal level. So social inclusion is essentially just to.
My question is, what does equality look like? What does that mean? What does that look like in practice? And why should we trust the United Nations as a source of equality?
Okay, I can do the first question first of just like what does it look like, and then I can talk about the United Nations bit. So what it looks like is just a removal of the absolute disadvantage between people. So not like on an individual basis of like an individual who is poor versus an individual who's rich in a general sense, but the absolute disadvantage caused by systems such as capitalism, militarism, that create a massive gap between certain groups, right? So equality just looks like those gaps, which I mean, we can obviously I can give examples of those gaps, but just the removal of those gaps. Now, the bit about the United Nations is that the reason why you can trust the United Nations on this first piece of evidence is that all it's talking about is just defining a phenomenon and then what you can do to solve the phenomenon, right? So it's not like investments in the United Nations or an investment in social inclusion does not necessitate an investment in the United Nations or any other sort of like international organization or body.
Okay, that's fair. The card, you've read a card about like why it's necessary for real world policymaking. What is so real world about policymaking in the context of debate?
I guess the way to look at what real, wait, can you say the question again?
What is so real world about policymaking within the context of debate?
I guess it's just about building fundamentals, right? Like the fundamentals of analyzing a policy decision, that kind of thing. Those are.
Why is discussing policy good? Why is an analysis of policy good?
I think it just builds a certain level of, I think caring is a way you can put it, as well as just a baseline knowledge that you have.
So policy education key to caring.
Yeah, I think so. Like in a debater, learning about policymaking can allow me in the real world to like actually care about that, like the problems that.
If you didn't analyze policy.
No, it's not about not caring about it. It's about like making it easier for you to do that and like have access to it.
Okay, I'm sending it out. It should be sent. I'm just gonna grab water real quick and I'll be right back. Okay, cool. The order. The order is going to be one, then case. And it'll be framework, advantage one, advantage two. Is everyone good? / can you hear me okay? Okay, fine.
colonialism is a structure, not an event that becomes a system of legibility by severing people from land, resulting in chattel slavery, indigenous genocide, and ecocide system of the universe. They are complicit in overturn without being engaged or relate with the world, making for fronting settler colonialism is a prior question that Patterson, 17, the colony. What is today's original BBC America? Not the metropolitan colony, because of the organizational limits of the colonial technology, label plunder, disappear the weapons that are forced knowledge, indigenous legitimacy, or technology, they want to spread bodies for my political, disposal, letting on the million all property, and national people, as a record party, rising navigator, however, the political values, the subjugation plan for like safety to support Hollywood, like simple phraseology of settler becoming settler, societies utilize recognition as the end all be all to go into deliberation, assuming that people consent to govern for native people, this particular reason consent that truly assimilates the dispossessed coercing, consent to be governed the electoral politics is the supreme law of our condition. In order for electoral politics to be operative, they have to imagine native people do not matter, or that there are no indigenous political orders in place. Therefore, genocidally erasing native people and intensifying the political fear through the ruse of consent. That's 17. One would have to imagine that indigenous political orders in order to make such a policy that public statement or indigenous people that simply do not better claim a form of politics that the society accrued and will empower the other states to place the land in history to make the consent of Africa to criminal side of the this spurious claim of colonial path of populace that consents via electoral system to be governed that are false that are back to original false claims of the settler, right to territory, right to govern, probably justice, reimagined recognition to be the right of repetitive dispossession of balance and inequality of power, electoralism, eradicating the notion of political to amending the deeper issues obfuscated by putting either consent or political recognition is the organism of justice and the overstatement of possibility because the complex politics being rendered in to rise up pluralism and legal context. The question of justice for one's inherent right by the state these or states who have morally through legal force of dispossession law enforce the nature of dispossession and then granted freedom and through the legal terms of consistent citizenship. The root of consent work by the possibility of freedom after dispossession and the freedom or argues actually sensitive to consent to colonial context papers over the force of bonds that beget consent. This is the problematic historical and philosophical legal basis of the study. Recognition appears to be only political and with presumed and solitary intellectual politics for the recognition and exercising of rights that may replicate the action of academia and the misrecognition of genocide as settlement and native thought as pedagogies and defeated kid practices work to secure the monopoly of white man and the trick of liberalism and the transmogrification of radicalism and palliative in order to fuel the counterinsurgency of racial capital. Usually a negative or rejected politics of recognition which only refusal to commit that gets solved. That's bro 20. The central one of the real is always on the racial and political representation for the recognition of cultural difference is decided by the better reason that is the representation. I mean, what it would believe the one resources the kind of to make you feel so with the dependent on the model of 72 is another representation with model of the subject of its critique. What makes itself still growing up in more an opportunity to succeed in my financial market is motivated a call for expansion in service of life will reason for the path of revolution expand by those that think pizza for progress from liberation movements above advocate for expansion of racial capital through an affirmative relationship to order marginality. This project of Denmark fed into a political separation through watching multicultural and representative democracy while it is a non-violent context breaking the policy of representation versus the content into the strategy and main revolutionary uprising liberal institutions, the university capitals, they utilize them to root desire for people to register raciality back to the communities on monopoly on the properties of violence the service of protecting the ascendancy of white life to end. This genocide on law naturalizes itself in the unconscious where settler dream becomes the extermination that young 17 the different individuals in the executive political relations affected by that you can reproduce or expect to civilization policies to fail to different aboriginal life forms of life that are recommended to justify the failed as the failed governance ended up looking at the primary truth of the fact of that because they fully eradicating those so that can only follow the actually getting into that circulated orbiting for sexual content not circulatory authorized escalated content they just will liquid through fix the deal of politics student dissemination durable content that organize the nation citizens sovereignty subject to the hypoxic vision of a unity movement propelled by the drive and move to eliminate disease to secure health and the tactics just out of all from biopolitics accepted to codify into bodies into Western body politics that's factual something and this was the intervention of the percentage of the listeners and former here rather than political advantage to say like at all costs of having a desire as professional colonists to work with the colonizer but public health programs are just settled this possession to promote secure political actors turn unit from appealing from a collective social process into a market to by political intervention and just only be cooperative stated reworked etc. Humanitarian and displacing critical collectivist analysis of earlier the appealing activities the Afro-League indigenous possibilities through the reservation accelerating death making only an orientation refusal as general could solve this the role of values to reject system of settler colonialism group their method context king 70 traditional refusal rap practice the colonel king refusal the authority to state and almost every refusal work every day necessary refusal are theoretical generative refusal the redirection of ideas to otherwise acknowledge unquestionable like I said, colonial configuration models that represent methodology refusal over limits of theories and knowledge of production, but the theory question the interrogate assumption that the one particularities of matter scrutiny to event, or perhaps halt the momentum and machinery that allows knowledge to facilitate interdictions on black and unified framework interpretation, evaluate the one is scholarly artifact. This means that after the specific orientation, try to weigh the hypothetical consequences of the one I see. One is as Smoker said, every time the one or two errors say they get away the impact of the tag is a new lake and a miss of the mutation that allows for them not to be held accountable for wrongs. If they set the inward and model plan, they can still win the debate because the app is a good idea. That's how their office is free to validate acceptable model premise on exclusion. Try to for my interpretation, be supported or resolvability, but you cannot magically about the affirmative, but you can, but your well can have an impact on campus scholarship circulated with the debate with self their representations often colonial warfare and world making purely proven with the debate successful legal project force that a debate to shift away from arguments making like case or cheating or McDonough and the TOC for proliferation of alternate approaches to fiat competitive incentives flip negative because if the team keeps losing it, force them to go back to the drawing board and reach something different, sees the survivalism decide that's far as 15. To let this question, what is we done to the more question, what is needed, radical shift in orientation of mental health, and the focus on question, what is second, and structure to make a run like it is impossible, but that's what is be done with epistemology, and I think the structure, the fear slaveness, and not only the fear slaveness, but also a seven, colonial rule making this that was already made up on the key to be proper frame. Just as the breach limits the relationship to the image of the state, maintain the monopoly over relationality, just as understood as the formulation of remote, the architect within black nation sociality, because outside of South Silver 13, or mission section over with their words of bullying, and following the justice to realization that fails with a responsible solution of a world to tragedy, and again, compared to the political paradigm, no limits of desperate and resolve the rules of the proceeding with seal and objectivity requires when I make a familiar intellectual comfort, the calculation, classification, interpretation, character, but only requires critical engagement with the state of organic, require plan, not committed, resolving the issue, the more effective mechanism, perhaps the dance and also what it become about no guidance, but it has yet to become a no. Yeah, and a little bit of stress breath on epistemological account that begins to dynamics relationality forcing. That was just for prevalent for knowing doing not have one of the one just found one consideration of relationality. Regard to legally or right justice, unite laws, morality, and refer to transcendental meaning, raciality is an impossible relationship, collapse of justice, new violence, civil society for individuality, practical, and the wrong particularity before running to true universal ethical life, i.e. the state. It has become so difficult to address justice with those as well limits because it's neither theorist nor social law of morality, interest, and decision making, economic, legal, or moral subject. Don't need any of the other cards because we can have them.
Okay. I'll start now. You didn't get to T, right?
I skipped you.
Yeah, okay, that's just making sure. Okay, so actually for on the K first. So can one believe that the state is not reformable and still believe that it has a duty to provide medicine?
What?
Like, can I believe that the current systems, like the World Trade Organization, should be providing people medicines without also conceding that it is reformable?
No. What?
So you think like there's no way to do good with our current systems without affirming the fact that they are good?
Yeah, that is the recognition politics thing about why why that moment of we can do one good act is commodified or weaponized by said institution to justify the expansion of racial capital, which is
right. Okay.
But also the Simpson evidence impact turns the idea of sort of non-indigenous people speculating about like the ways in which policies operate or what the role for imperial ought to do.
So does the critique apply to like all indigenous people in the global South or like just those indigenous to the Americas or what?
Settler colonialism is a theory about how colonialism and indigeneity operate within the Americas, but it has explanatory power for how violence gets exported abroad.
Okay. On the Maxwell evidence, does this mean that any attempt to prevent disease is a management of indigenous life? Like attempts to prevent disease in indigenous communities.
The Maxwell evidence is an impact turn to the second advantage that presumes a sort of Western mode of knowledge production regarding medicine. Our argument is that such interventions preclude forms of indigenous medicine that are casted as spiritual and whatnot, and not true forms of Western medicine. The AF in the wavering of the WTO constructs a legitimacy or for around the WTO about what constitutes valid medicine, which is our argument that gets weaponized by these institutions to pathologize other forms of medical healing.
Okay, in the King 17 evidence, when you talk about the practice of refusal by the Kanawake people, if you're not a member of the Kanawake, why do you get to co-opt their politics of refusal without like having the exact same problems that you claim the affirmative has?
It's not a co-option argument. The part you want to look to is at the bottom part of the card, it articulates what this looks like in the process of research in the context explicitly for both non-native individuals. It articulates that we need a moment or an interdiction in how sort of knowledge production operates. So yes, there might be a difference in relationships between the material instances of refusal, but what is my role then is an interdiction into the way that knowledge production operates, which is then the ways in which refusal is able to shift both as a method and theory.
So then how, actually that's time. I'll start prep.
Excellent. Floating ghost voice. Ronick, when you oh hey DeMarvin. When you spread next, can you get closer to the mic or something?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's possible, but if you can get closer to the mic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Also check your bin.
Jasmine, you said check what?
I was trying to be cool and slangy, but your Venmo.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, cease prep. Sending it out. Do you have it open? Oh,
Okay, it just came through.
okay.
Um, Bring it up right now. Okay. Cool. I should be good.
Okay, so the order is case and then K, and I'll do like the framework, both the bit you read on case and the K framework at the same time, right in between those.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
So case, then framework, including that I think De Silva evidence on framework that you read, and then like K proper.
Okay. And K framework will be done in K proper, right? Where I do like R interp is yada yada yada.
Yeah, at the top, yeah. Okay, are you good? All right. First off on case, a quick overview. Biopower is a costly and ongoing issue to shift depth.
Hold up, sorry.
Yeah?
Your audio just cut out, so I just couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay. Is that the first time that happened? Can you hear me right now? No.
I can personally hear you. But I think
they just froze too.
yeah.
So.
We love technical debate. Technology. Oh, you're back.
Okay. I heard Jasmine. I just could not hear Veeru.
Okay. I
Can
don't
you
know.
hear Veeru now?
Yeah, is it all good now?
It's better. I'm gonna turn off my screen so that maybe it's bandwidth issues. So I
Okay.
can just
Okay.
Can you hear? Is that good now though?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay, I'll start. A quick overview. Biopiracy is a costly and ongoing issue as the theft and patenting of indigenous medicines that deprives millions of dollars from the indigenous people of the Americas and Asia. Intellectual property protections are the main incentive for biopiracy. Without the affirmative, there will be a massive loss of indigenous heritage and economic sovereignty. And then on the first advantage, capitalism and intellectual property protections and the rights themselves devastate because they do not allow for the ability of medications to spread throughout all people equally, and thus the affirmative is entirely necessary. There are no case arguments other than the framework, which means that after I win the framework debate, the overview can be seen as completely true and as the most just method should be the reason to vote F. On the framework, I'll do the framework here before we get into the line by line of the critique. Starting with the framework and role of the ballot to treat the act as a scholarly artifact. We're still winning this debate because amplifying the voices of South Asian activists, primarily Vandana Shiva, and bringing her ideas of biopiracy to the debate space is an example of a good epistemic investment. Similarly, if the 1AC is a scholarly artifact, then that means that the same must be applied to the 1NC for reciprocity on the framework. The 1NC contains a card, the K card Juarez, which is by a college debater and has no peer review, and it has the intellectual combination of groups of indigenous to the Americas and indigenous to South Asia. This scholarship fuses all indigenous bodies without nuance. These two examples turn their framework and guarantee an AF ballot under their framework. The AF's framework of justice does not rely on the conceptualization of justice through statehood as their distillant evidence implied. In fact, the reclamation of justice as a word to describe social inclusion is better because it reverses the casting out of Black and Native socialities that is described by that evidence. Any response to this framework is a link of omission. If every time the state does something, it masks everything bad, then there's no way to exist because state engagement is inevitable. On to K proper. First, on the Paperson and Simpson's evidence. First, the AF's rejection of legal norms and political sovereignty shreds indigenous treaties and forces a false choice on native populations. Turns to Paperson and Simpson evidence. Brunel 7. Indigenous political actors face sovereignty, citizenship, indigenous political resistance is a refusal of false choice. The argument is inherently incompatible with indigenous political autonomy, missing a precise concept and can pin down alternative representatives. It's possible for the entity to enjoy concurrent sovereignty. Indigenous refusal of false choice indicated a persistent effort to be both self-determined and sovereignty means, and social construction of sovereignty is always in a process and never completed project. Indigenous politics can be informed by reconsideration of sovereignty. Decolonization does not mean that there is no relationship at all. The United States means remains committed by treaty and legal obligations. On the bro evidence, first, no link. The argument is about land sovereignty, while the AF is about cultural expression and sovereignty. Even though the AF doesn't discuss land sovereignty, the explicit anti-land stance of the K abandons land-based resistance, and it's a tool of white supremacy. It evacuates forms of indigenous community. It turns the K. That's Coulthard and Simpson 16. But there are lines of argument that are unwittingly infected with the anti-native and settlement so hard that the indigenous people celebrate their justice from the supposedly anti-black commitments to land, attacking indigenous political orders through targeting indigenous people's relationships to land as a side of intense white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, or relationship to the land itself generates the political system to abandon it would amount to a form of auto-genocide. On the Maxwell evidence, no link. This card speaks of intervention and care about property protections. The AF does not want to eliminate disease, but rather preserve treatments that have existed in pagan traditions for millennia. The CF clarification of this evidence has no basis in the card itself, and also just proves our evidence. The reason why you want to vote for the second advantage is because traditional indigenous medicine that doesn't appeal to traditional Western conceptualizations of medication should be preserved. The Maxwell evidence just boosts us. On the King evidence, this alternative only gives a chance to rethink thought processes, but does not provide anything meaningful. The refusal must produce some sort of indigenous politic that can respond to and better the lives of indigenous people, but it fails. Ivory Tower turn. The alternative traps itself into an ivory tower. Endless refusal of the state preserves the hierarchies and co-options of indigenous politics by those attempting to limit reform. It's a ruse of solvency, pretending as though a solution works as though it works is worse than just not presenting it at all, and turns the K. Non-native turn. The affirmative focus on the K excludes many from the conversation, especially when the affirmative's main biopiracy advantage that they are attacking is conceptualized to South Asian activism. Settler colonialism forecloses indigenous collaboration with Black and immigrant communities that cause fatalism for native populations. And on the reform argument, even if limited, the very existence of durable gains proves progress is possible through legal channels. Noise Cat 16. Indigenous people have compelled states to forego assimilation as process of overtly coercive politics have been slowly and steadily replaced with rights to land, jurisdiction, and sovereignty.
Cool. I'm going to run prep. Starting now. Okay, cool. The order will be the critique with a brief overview. All right, cool.
And just a reminder about the mic.
Yeah, I'm gonna move it closer. Hopefully this gets better.
All right.
Settler colonialism is the ongoing structure that marks the influence of non-human to the ontology of Western man and to consider what's the unique progression of the logic of genocide or modeling through academic institutions and construct a model of knowledge that justifies plunder, disappearance, death patterns, and two implications. One, scholarship shapes reality becomes the basis for justification forms the colonial violence outside of space. Two, debate does shape some information. Iterative repetition is turning scholastics or normalize themselves into debate or still in the will to colonize. I'm going for framework. If I win framework, I would debate period because of impact on a model debate that centers around playing field. There's a prior question to them to being able to access the case often. Also, it makes all the link to the permutation irrelevant because we've invented the form by which the one is presented. And well, that often is a question about the content presented. Extend the counter interpretation. You should value the one is called the artifact. The purpose of whether the epistemic and rhetorical project of fiat is valuable and not valid prior to weighing the hypothetical consequences of the one is the extent. One is the horrors of survivalism. So the question that fiat poses the what is to be done is presumed working within the existing structure is worthwhile. The process of obfuscating the structural analysis of colonialism that undergirds violence, voting negative, or refusing to ask the question of what is to be done with these structures through words the process of study that focus on the ways in which traditional understanding of the human has become ontologized, casting a blackness of savages into a liminal place of violence is necessary to open a paradigm for engaging in this world. There are two impacts of this. A point is survival strategy. The only shift from the locus of study onto epistemic investments is impossible to map out the ways in which the liminal fear of the native has been indoctrinated itself to help provide the language for native folks to use to create zones of care and social life to heal from fatigue and always laboring and structures that don't give back. That always in turn their fairness often with fiat makes it inaccessible. Fiat makes debate inaccessible and violence in individuals. It begs the question whether it's possible to engage in a procedural with fear of pedagogy and valid debate in the first place. And B, prove that debate as is a psychological bond and all worth for learning, which means there's no terminal impact to any of their offense. Second is revolutionary tactics, forcing a discussion centered around examining where we are at rather than what to do. Inculcates a breakage in the repetition of the will to colonize, rewiring synaptic wiring, forcing a shift from traditional libidinal understanding to the lab for efficacious cross-racial decolonization movements to become possible, only starting from a position of structural analysis to shift the terrain of discussion from romantic to grievance to the one D point bird. That's the one Simpson evidence as well as the Horace evidence, which is an impact turned their argument about the inability to craft native and immigrant coalitional groups. Because the argument is that it's possible, but it requires an understanding of settler colonialism as a structure. Anything else is a form of colonial equivocation, which is why when they're like, hey, we are also decolonial because we have Southeast Asian voices, it is the way in which they map the distinction between indigeneity and nativeness, but the way in which nativeness as casted as redness is always in the undergirding why when immigrants come to the land, they still are a colonizer and stealing their resources, which is why a prior shift in how we understand those relationships is necessary in order for there to be a form of efficacious cross-racial solidarity. The horror in that is that they were a college student does not make sense. It's that it would live without a warrant. It does not answer any of the analysis that is in the card that I've already extended above. So this should be scratched off and flow. The sort of homogenization offense is incorrect because the argument that the natives within Americas are casted in a unique ontological position that's signified modernity, but then that is casted onto other countries, which is how it gets shifted around globally, which is why we are controlling the root cause thing. The legalism offense, it doesn't matter if I win the ontology debate, which there was no defense to in the 1AR, which means this is game over. The genocide of the native and the logic of the grand modernity, the oppositional tension between the category of human and the category of the savage and still the will to colonize. They have failed to answer any of our psychoanalytical game, whereby the field of signification that solidified the Indian and the toxic signifier and defined the foil of politics for the nation of futurity. 3 warrants from the young card that have gone considered. 1 is history. The framing of the native genocide is examples of progressive storm modernity shows how in order for civil society to become coherent, there must be native death. Bird explicitly cites the way the first people genocide was marked not at the time of mass violence, but rather a celebration for a new era to come. 2, assimilation or die. The incessant demand for native people to become quote unquote incorporated by becoming enfolded through into civilization, but then the intensification of violence on those who refuse reveal the cyclical death drive of modernity, whereby the aim towards a unified civilization justified escalated violence. This should also be flagged as an impactor into the framework of justice because it remarks that social inclusion can only end at the endpoint of assimilation. And 3, the tropage of savagery. The ideological figure of the savage Indian is brought up in political discourse when constructing another that violence is justified against. 2 examples. 1, the Modoc Memo during the Iraq and Afghanistan, where the AG cited the memo to justify U.S. soldiers killing civilians. The memo was written during the 1800s, colonizing the frontier that said Indians are killable because they are savages. 2, Beacon state of nature. Hobbes defined the state as a rational actor in contradiction to the anarchy of the state nature. And when he said that it was embodied by Native Americans, they carried over into things such as the Constitution, which defined Indian tribes as distinct from foreign states. Also explained why the Iraq and Afghanistan enemy territory was called Indian territory, and the Osama bin Laden was called Geronimo. Winning the psychoanalytic thesis wins us debate. 1, that flips the burden of their examples of reform go to negative, because only our theory can explain why we have to keep reforming the same reform performed even after their path. They can't explain why the system always returns to genocide. Viewpoint negative. Only our theory explains why reforms as a genocidal restructuring, which co-ops the myth killed, revolutionary for reassures the collective ego, cellular ego, moral goodness. 2, inclusion is genocide. All the reforms and arguments assume Native people want to be part of the civil society, which is part and parcel of the simulatory genocidal politics of Native people. The attempt to translate damage in capital to get Native people participating in civil society is proof of genocide, not the intending. 3, you have a cognitive bias. You think about civilization, the state, and what politics ought to look like a certain way, and you should earn negative on all such questions. And independently, you should, regardless of ontology is or is not true, you should assume it to be true, because anything else results in indigenous return reservation logic, where people feel good with one-time moralism and make things better, turn away when violence continues to happen. The false choices argument is the status quo. It results in a ruse of consent, which is the Simpson evidence, and explained on the third point on the ontology argument. We are not anti-land. You ran to the wrong bro card. We are reading a critique of representational politics, i.e. the moments of exclusion that are demobilized by racial capital to justify expansionism on a wider scale, which is why when you say we do one good thing for the WTO, it's not one benign action, but rather expands their reach of global capital, because they use this in the moment to say, hey, we've done some good shit, to then do more fucked up shit. The immigrants argument is incorrect, because as I explained in the review, we allow for better forms of cross-racial solidarity. The alternative solves the question of framework. They have conceded that it's about educational models that are able to reshape how we think about the world. So our practice or refusal is a libidinal break, which solves our ontology offense. The noise card offense is incorrect. Those commitments are rooted in by genocidal logics. Also, this card flows negative. It agrees that the starting point of refusal answers their arguments.
All right. I have like 3 minutes.
Jasmine, was the audio better for that?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not gonna read any new cards, but I didn't completely read that evidence, the Barker 17. So I'm just gonna like completely read it. That's it. All right. All right. The order is going to be I like framework more generally, and then K. This is an affirmative ballot because we have one more framework, but even if you buy their framework, they link to themselves with instances of poor epistemic investments. And because the alternative fails, the app versus the squo under their framework is an easy choice for the affirmative. So no matter what, you must vote affirmative. They did not extend the De Silva evidence, which means that they concede the ideas of justice. This was an entirely clashless framework debate. There were extensions of their two subpoints of coloniality, but there was not any interaction with what I said. Just to extend what I said about De Silva, the app's framework of justice does not rely on the conceptualization of justice through statehood. In fact, we reclaim the word of justice as a methodology that requires social inclusion, which means that any response to this framework is a link of omission. If every time the state does something good, it masks everything bad, then there's no way to exist because state engagement is inevitable. This can be cross-applied to the noise cat evidence, which clearly says this. They make the baseless claim that the noise cat evidence somehow flows negative, but it's untrue. It has the exact statement that gains are limited, but they are still gains. It is clear that the rights, land, jurisdiction, and sovereignty must be fought for. So this general idea of what the framework shows and what the noise cat evidence proves, it means that the most just decision is to vote affirmative. However, under their framework, you can still look at this because, as I said before, an extension of the investment in our epistemic investments inside of South Asian activism, primarily Vandana Shiva, which is our main evidence of the second advantage, is a good epistemic investment. And even though she relies on a certain idea of the World Trade Organization existing still, that doesn't mean that investments in her methodology is necessarily conceding that it is completely good to work in the same manner. It's simply of the best methodology to complete it. And as I said before, the Juarez evidence, as well as the combination of groups indigenous to the Americas and South Asia, show a bad scholarship because it fuses indigenous bodies. They say that it's pointless to say that Juarez being a college student doesn't matter, but that's untrue. Juarez is someone who's writing from the perspective of a college student who's inside of like peer checking other indigenous people, kind of being able to check and see what they were writing, these kinds of things. So just a person writing means that your epistemic investment is relatively amateur and immature in both ways. So, but in both of those ways, the framework fails. Onto their psychoanalysis offense that they have, that they say that only their theory proves why working through the same systems leads to genocide. You can cross-apply what I said about how it's super different to compare Asia and specifically South Asia to Native people. This is a totally new extrapolation of what my opponent is talking about how you can compare this to shift around globally, especially because their authors clearly do not aim to provide a prescriptive theory for the international sphere, but rather just America. It's extremely different to look about genocide in the context of independence from Britain versus about a removal of their sovereignty from America, if you look at, or from the United States, if you look at an American context. So you cannot compare the two. Yeah, I'll just come back to noise cat one more time. It's clear that you can make gains, and by removing these instances of biopiracy, specifically through a medicine, you have the ability to resolve something. Simply working through the WTO, those impacts do not overwhelm the impacts of resolving instances of medical imperialism. Good debate.
Good debate, Veeru.
I was muted. Okay, technology is still hard a year and a half later. Well, wow, thank y'all so much for an excellent LD Throwdown debate. I think that a lot of great arguments, specifically a lot of framework ingenuity is happening here, and I'm excited for Raunak to kind of share some constructive criticism off the live streams, that stuff that the folks won't see. And Veeru, super proud of you showing up and showing out argumentation, period. So take these notes from Raunak, and you already know how I feel about the following redo statement. Take these notes, apply it to a redo, apply it to your blocks, strategizing all the way. Because if you can handle yourself in these debates, everything else just trickles so easily from that. But to the community, thank you all so much for watching it live. For those who are going to catch the recording, this is excellent and great. We love the collective, Debate Boutique. If this is something that you would want to home for in, definitely read the description box information. But that's about it. Gonna end the stream now. Peace out, folks.